On the show today, we have guests Kourtney Hake and Paige Timmerman. Paige Timmerman is a high school English teacher at Salem Community High School in Salem, Illinois, and a National Board Certified Teacher member since 2019. She strives to provide authentic, real world writing opportunities that meet her students' skills and interests. Kourtney Hake is an English teacher at Sparta Lincoln School in Sparta, Illinois. She is also a member of the National Council for Teachers of English, the Illinois Reading Council, and the Illinois Association of Teachers of English since 2014. Get ready for an engaging episode.
I'm educational justice coach Lindsay Lyons, and here on the Time for Teachership podcast, we learn how to inspire educational innovation for racial and gender justice, design curricula grounded in student voice, and build capacity for shared leadership. I'm a former teacher leader turned instructional coach. I'm striving to live a life full of learning, running, baking, traveling, and parenting because we can be rockstar educators and be full human beings. If you're a principal, assistant superintendent, curriculum director, instructional coach, or teacher who enjoys nerding out about co-creating curriculum with students, I made this show for you. Here we go. Paige and Kourtney, welcome to the Time for Teachership podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. So I think, the audience has just listened to your bios. What is important for you to have audience know as we kind of jump into our conversation today? I know for me, it is certainly that your book, Their Stories, Their Voices, is incredible, and everyone, all listeners should grab it. And we'll talk more about it today. But what is on your minds, or what do you want people to be thinking about?
I think for me, I just hate this tendency that we have to stop asking students about their own experiences the older that they get. We're asking them to write about themselves a lot in the elementary level, but whenever they get into the higher grades, we focus so much on test prep and getting them ready to take the SAT that we forget that they are humans having an experience, and we should be giving them platforms to share those experiences. So I think just making sure that narrative becomes a cornerstone in the secondary classroom as well is sort of the idea that this book was born out of.
I think also one of the things that I like to think about is how to engage our students. Middle school is where I'm at, and some days they're awesome, some days they're not. But getting them engaged in the writing and trying to get them excited about writing is really difficult. And so adding their voice back into it is a way to add that engagement to get them to write about something that they actually care about.
Such a good point. Like, I cannot tell you times where my students were more engaged than when they were talking about themselves and the issues they cared about, right? Like, that's how you do it. So I love that. And so one of the first kind of questions I usually ask is in line with the idea of freedom dreaming, which Dr. Bettina Love describes as dreams grounded in the critique of injustice. What is that big dream that you hold for education? And I think you both kind of started speaking to this. I don't know if you want to elaborate on it a tiny bit here.
Yeah, I will elaborate. I mean, to answer that, I would reiterate, obviously, the fact that our students deserve to have space to tell their stories. I think that's an important part of education. But also, I feel like I'm doing my students a disservice if I do not prepare them for more than just a test. I want to teach them to write in ways that may not be covered by the SAT, but ways that they're going to be exposed to throughout their whole adult life. So whenever I look at what a narrative looks like in the real world, whether it be a blog post, a memoir, a social media post, even, I see all kinds of blending of genres that I don't see in schools. In schools, we tend to teach different genres in different boxes, and you cannot blend them at all. But whenever you look at what real writers do, there's all kinds of blending going on, and there's all kinds of rule breaking. And so I want to be the type of teacher that looks at what real writers are doing and isn't afraid to say, well, why can my students not do that too?
Yeah, I think whenever we were looking at what does narrative look like, we kind of found a lot of things that you wouldn't traditionally think of as a narrative. They weren't all just memoir. They just incorporated their own voice in some way, and so that's kind of speaking to that blending of genres. That's what authentic writing is, and that's what we can get our students to actually want to achieve.
Yeah, one of the things that I absolutely loved, and like this was always my inclination as a teacher, but again, you guys have just like operationalized it. You've done such a beautiful job. It's like, what does it look like in the real world, right? Like, so even when I would teach test prep, I'd be like, okay, let me find some like really funny, like comedic kind of feminist article, and then we're gonna like learn how to answer these silly choice questions based on this awesome article because this is like at least engaging. And so I love that you pull in all of the examples, the social media posts that you have, the professional authors, the student writers, and kind of books and collections that you've had, and as well as your own students. It's so beautifully done. One of kind of the things that I'm curious about is, and I think you addressed this kind of early on, is kind of the mindset shift that teachers might have to kind of embark upon when they are thinking about including or really making the space required to do this work well for writing narratives, amidst all of the other pressures and curricula things that you've seen. Like, what is it that either for each of you was kind of like a aha moment, like, yes, we need this because whatever your why is, or that you've seen like in people reading the book and kind of grappling with that prior mindset, shifting over to like, no, there is a need for this work and we need to make space for it.
Yeah, I think for me, our curriculum that we currently use doesn't really teach narrative, and then the narrative that it does teach is the last quarter, which normally we don't even get to that because of state testing and all that stuff. And I've been looking at other curriculums because we're thinking about switching, and a lot of curriculums use narrative at the end of the year, and then on the state test they're asked write a narrative. And so it's they're not practicing the skills throughout the year, and then they're expected to perform that on the state test. And so incorporating those skills throughout the school year has become a little bit more of my priority to make sure that the students are prepared for that test. Because if they haven't been asked to do it, then how are they going to be performing that on a pressured state?
Mhm. For me, I think it kind of, just to go back to what I was talking about earlier, this idea of blending genres. I know I've really had to push against that in my own instruction because the way I was taught, you don't use I at all in anything other than a narrative. So if you're writing a research paper, there is no space for your voice. However, whenever I read like these really beautifully written op-eds, which I would consider a research writing, um, I don't want to call it assignment, but that's a genre that requires research as well. The most compelling op-eds to me incorporate a personal story. It doesn't have to be at the forefront of it. It doesn't have to be the main focus, but if there's like a small vignette in there of how the author relates to this issue, it makes me care about it more through that human element. So I know, just kind of pushing back against this idea of you can't do this in this type of writing, and opening it up and allowing my students to explore different ways to write without putting them in a box, um, I think is what is probably the biggest challenge of this mindset shift, but also the part that comes with the most rewards.
That's so well said. And it makes me think about kind of like our national political landscape and the way that people talk to one another or don't talk to one another. And one of the things that I have heard as a critique of like the Democratic Party's kind of like ways of sharing information is like it is very statistics, it is very facts, it's very research paper-esque as if you were to teach it in that box, right? It is like, here is that there's like the personal stories have been removed, it is not as engaging. Like that's fascinating. Like I imagine like one of your students could actually be like a political consultant or something for someone to be like, when you are trying to get people to listen to you, incorporate personal narrative. Like that could be fascinating.
I'm teaching about Anne Frank right now. We're reading the play based on her. And, I can tell the kids day in, day out about the events of the Holocaust. But until they hear it from a child their own age and hear what she went through, it does not sink in.
Yeah, that makes total sense too, right? Like, I mean, we're human beings. So I love that narrative is in it is the focus of your book, but it is weaved into like four different pieces too, which I really appreciate. I mean, maybe let's go there. Do you guys want to give us kind of an overview of what are the four types of narrative that you name? And then also just my curriculum writer brain is on fire reading this book because I'm also thinking about, you guys suggest kind of a planning approach. You have like a kind of a weekly, a 3-week calendar sample of like how would you actually arc out a unit on narrative writing. So I don't know if one of you wants to take each of those or how you want to divide it up.
I will say that those unit plans are all Paige's baby because she did so much work making sure that it worked in an actual classroom. Because I'm a little bit more tied to my curriculum of what I can do. And she had a little bit more freedom. And so those were unit plans that were tested in an actual classroom. And so Paige did a really good job on those. Um,
Thank you.
but as we were researching, we kind of found that all these different narratives that we were reading were kind of falling into four different genres, if you call them, or types of narratives. And so we kind of named them based on that. So we had the informative narrative, the analytical narrative, the persuasive narrative, and reflective narrative.
So to expand on those, the informative narrative would be your main goal of writing is to send a message, is to teach your audience about something, provide them information. But again, don't be afraid to bring in that narrative element. So, for example, if you are trying to do like a cautionary tale and you're trying to warn your audience against the dangers of using social media too young, then bringing in that vignette of, okay, well, here's what happened to me whenever I was a kid and I started using social media, and here's what I went through, and then using that to inform. The analytical narrative is really, that's where we brought in a lot of podcasting type assignments, because we feel like podcasts themselves are just an exercise in analysis. You're not necessarily trying to answer you're exploring questions. You're not necessarily trying to come up with one concrete answer. You're just kind of looking at it through different angles. And so in that chapter of our book, you'll find lots of, I mean, we have different modes of projects in each chapter of the book. But this one, especially, we love for podcasts because it's a way to explore something and bring in your own story as you're exploring, but more for the goal of just deepening your knowledge and your thinking and becoming smarter after going through the exploration rather than just trying to find the answer. The persuasive narrative, that one is what I would formerly think of as my research paper, where I'm making an argument. I'm trying to teach my audience something or to believe something. I'm trying to elicit a change, but I'm doing so through the use of my own story. So if I've gone through an experience that was really meaningful and it's connected to what I'm writing about, I shouldn't be afraid to include that experience. And then finally, our last chapter focuses on the reflective narrative, which is what we think of whenever we traditionally think of narrative as just sharing a story for the sake of reflection and personal growth, because we still do believe in that. Even though we're trying to blend genres, we still recognize and value the narrative in what it was traditionally seen as. However, we like to kind of look at, well, what does the narrative look like today? Because we've all seen those journal prompts that we've given our students in the past. Like, what'd you do over the summer? Or what's your favorite Christmas memory? And we're trying to kind of push back and find new experiences, especially for our older students. So in that chapter, we really try to focus on multimedia type projects because narrative looks differently. We're seeing like graphic memoirs come out now. We're seeing people sharing their stories through podcasting. And we want to give our students those experiences. They may not be comfortable writing about it, but they might be comfortable sharing in another way.
Hi, this is Leah popping in to share that the guests are sharing Their Stories, Their Voices, a book written by Kourtney Hake and Paige Timmerman. This book helps secondary education teachers understand what personal narrative looks like, how it can empower student writers to create authentic writing, and how it allows students to use their own voices while writing in other genres. You can find it at the blog post for this episode, www.lindsaybethlyons.com/blog/222. Now back
Could
to the
also pick
show.
up this book, and I'm just thinking of like the analytical essays and stuff, right? Like we're doing stuff like that all the time, like merging the narrative, figuring out the multimodal piece. I mean, there's such a level of access that you're providing teachers for their students who may not traditionally be successful in writing. That's really exciting. So thank you all for that. I think there's so much else in here. I mean, in terms of like the specific actions, you guys get really specific in those sample units. Is there anything that was like a really, I don't know, exciting one to teach? Paige, I know that Kourtney said you've taught a lot of these, or is there a particular kind of lesson or part of like kind of a staple part or component of the unit arc that's kind of agnostic to any of the four categories that is like exciting to you that you want to name?
Sure.
I think the
Um,
experimental narrative is
it's
my favorite.
the analytical narrative.
In the experimental narrative project.
Mhm. We love to talk about this one. I'm glad you asked.
Yeah,
Because it's also, even though it was my student that did it, it's also Kourtney's favorite. So I love
it is.
that. It's also my favorite part of the book because I'm so proud of my students. So one of the narratives that I had my students do, we ended up calling it the experimental narrative. And the idea was I wanted my students to learn something new or try something new that they had never done before and kind of document their progress of that journey. And we see that in several texts. So the mentor text we use for that, Little and Often, about a man who builds a boat to try to understand his dad better. So he builds a canoe by hand. Dragon Hoops, about a teacher that wants to learn more about basketball. He doesn't know anything about basketball, wants to learn more. So it's about his journey. And then the last one was I'll Have What She's Having, which is a narrative about a journalist who tries all these celebrity fad diets to see if they really work. And so we read excerpts from all of those. I have to mention, we did not encourage the students to also try the fad diets.
No.
Kourtney was very clear about that we need
Yeah.
to make sure we make that clear.
The part about her book that was really good for the students, I thought, is like the first introduction or first chapter where it lays out her ground rules of this is how I'm going to do it. And if this happens, then I'm not going to continue and that kind of thing. And that was the part that was really good in that one because the diets were insane. You know,
Yeah. They're really funny too.
they
Funny
were.
stuff going on there. So anyway, we looked at a piece from each of those texts, and I challenged my own students. Okay, I want you to make something new, or learn something new, or try something new. You have a few weeks to do it. Write down some notes as you're doing that, and then we'll come together in a month or so, and we'll hash out your notes and make it more of a narrative writing project. And it was just fun to see what the students came up with. Like I still have a bench at the front of my room that was built as a result of this unit. It's really helpful because I put papers on it. I had students do things in the kitchen that they'd never done, like connecting with family members. Um, and I emphasize, like, you don't have to spend money to do this. Like, I had one girl that was really good at hair and she wanted to do this hairstyle. So she practiced it, watched tutorials, and did the hairstyle on her sister. One of the projects that really stood out to us is one of my students is very skilled artist, and she wanted to learn how to draw a more realistic face. And so she practiced over the course of the time that I gave her, drawing different, like she zoomed in on different body parts, the eye, the nose, the mouth, and she really worked on it. And you can see the progression in the book of like what her face looked like at the beginning of the process and what it looked like at the end. And then she wrote about that experience. I don't know if Kourtney, if you had anything else to say.
Yeah, my favorite part of it was she was really struggling, I want to say, with the eyes. And, instead of getting discouraged and quitting or just moving on. She went and watched YouTube videos. She asked her art teacher for help. She thought about different things that she could do to continue learning on that process. And that's a skill that a lot of our students struggle with. Of whenever they're not doing well or they're not getting the results they want to, they want to quit. But she had that kind of resilience to continue on, and I loved her writing about that.
I think in the spirit of that, I'll ask my next question. So thinking about, challenges that we encounter in learning new things and trying new things, are there challenges that you all have faced in teaching or having students engage with narrative units, or for people who have kind of picked up the book, read it, and tried to implement, like colleagues you've coached or teachers you've talked to, any challenges that they've faced, and like how have you worked through it or coached someone through that challenge?
I would say for me, I know whenever I have students write with narrative, and I think any ELA teacher can relate, is sometimes it's a beautiful mix of like finding the right prompt at the right time for that student. And we're not always able to achieve that 100% of the time. I mean, we're not perfect. But that is why we structure our book the way that we did. I think you had asked about structure earlier and we didn't quite get to it. So I did want to come back around to that. Each one of our chapters is laid out kind of like a menu. We have like a menu at the beginning of each of our chapters with content, because we want to offer our authors, or I'm sorry, our readers, lots of choices whenever they're planning a unit. It's kind of almost like a build your own style book. And so we give lots of ideas for mini lessons at the beginning, like what skills at the sentence level of their writing do your students need to work on? Choose a few of these from here. Now, what are some different prompts that you can give to help them start thinking about topics in their life where they can utilize these skills? So then we have like different starter projects, and then we have bigger unit projects. So I don't remember off the top of my head how many we give of each, but we wanted to make sure there was a plethora of choices. And so again, kind of going back to your question, I would think the biggest challenge is picking a unit and designing and building your own unit so that it meets the needs of your students. It's hard to meet everybody's needs all in one unit. But we hope that through the choices that we offer, that we can reach everybody at some point.
I think one of my challenges is I get in my head about I have to follow the curriculum. And I'm real bad about, okay, the curriculum says Monday I'm doing this, Tuesday I'm doing this, Wednesday I'm doing this. And I lose track of, okay, what are my students struggling with? And it's when I get into the weeds of that I have to remind myself to stop and think, okay, what are these students struggling on? And what do they need help with? And that's where I pull in those mini lessons and those craft move skills. And so it's trying to kind of see the bigger picture rather than focusing on I got to get through this because my arbitrary deadline says that I need to. And so my challenge in my own head is just getting out of my head and focusing on my students.
I love
And what I
that.
love about how our book is laid out, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, is that challenge that you're talking about, Kourtney, is that you can go into our book really easily and find a small mini lesson that you could use to work on that skill. So somebody that is tied to a curriculum that may not be able to adopt a huge unit like we talk about, we feel like there's still something in there for them to help students, maybe in a smaller way.
Absolutely, for sure. I love the structures and just the plethora of examples that you have that you could easily go in and pull. I highly agree. And I think there's so much that, Kourtney, what you were talking about in terms of seeing the bigger picture. I loved kind of in your, I think it was in your epilogue, that you were talking about the relationships just being so important and that we would always make time for relationships with students and learning about students, and they do that through narrative writing, right? They tell you who they are, and I just love that that is often the bigger picture, often the thing that gets cut when we are trying to cram a lot of curriculum in that is like missing, right? It's like the human element. And so I just love that this is curriculum and it gets at the human element, so it's really cool that you can do both. I also just love the I wrote this sentence down, so I'm paraphrasing slightly, but that typically when we have students read, that students are trained to look for an answer, not marvel at the craft. And you're so right, right? It's like we rarely invite students to just open up and marvel at the craft at the sentence level. What did you like? And that you have them actually create their own craft move chart that's like student driven from the mentor text that you provide. A lot of what we talk about on this podcast is like student agency and student voice and how do we just like let the students drive the learning. And I was recently in a PT where someone was talking about grammar and how it was so frustrating. And I was like, oh, Mechanically Inclined by Jeff.
Anderson.
Thank you, Anderson. Yeah. And it's like, oh my gosh, I saw that referenced in your book. And I was like, okay, so they know what's up. Like, this is so fun to just kind of extract and read to marvel at the craft and be able to let that interest kind of drive their own narrative pieces where they're writing about what's interesting to them in a way that's interesting to them because you've structured it in a way that they can find something really interesting and then go for it. So I love all of the pieces of this. I don't know if that sparked any thoughts for you all. I just wanted to name all the things I loved.
Thank you. And it's funny. I think the more high level our students are, and I say that ironically because I don't like putting students in a box of honors and not honors, but I think our students that are most motivated struggle the most with with just marveling because they're looking for the answer. They're trying to do school. What do you want me to do? I'll do it. I'll jump through the hoops so I can move on. And just stopping and pausing and admiring that beauty, I think that's just a powerful experience that we can provide to them.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that I'm excited about is this episode is going to drop actually at almost kind of like the start of next school year. So as people are finishing up listening to this episode, they're like driving into work and like their first week or whatever. What do you think is something that they could do like right away, either from a planning lens or even like a teaching implementation quick activity lens, for them to kind of lean into more narrative writing this year?
I think a good place to start is the notebook prompts that we have at the back of the book. We just have resources to find different notebook prompts to get them jump started on thinking about writing about themselves and writing about their interests.
Yeah. And I would echo that too. I think for me, it's just a matter of establishing an environment where students know that their voice matters here, making sure we're having those conversations with them, making sure we're giving them an opportunity to share their own stories, even if it's not through a big, huge narrative unit, even if it's smaller ways, like Kourtney was talking about through a notebook, just establishing that environment and showing them that you are important in here. And yes, tests are important, but your story is more important.
I love that. So this question just came into my head. A little behind the scenes. How do you have so many amazing resources in here for mentor texts and different ideas. How do you all kind of like organize yourself do you just kind of read for fun in whatever capacity you want and then just like have a notes app or something where you jot all of these ideas down? Like how do you come up with all of these great resources?
A lot of the texts we were already reading, and it was, hey, this would work, this would work. And so most of the texts I had already read or Paige had already read, because we're just big readers to begin with. And so that was a major part of it.
Kourtney's a bigger reader than I am. I'm just gonna. She gave me my flowers earlier, so I'm gonna give her hers. She had all kinds of text ideas. So yeah, I mean, and I think that's true of most teachers. I mean, we're naturally inquisitive. We want to learn, so we're all readers to begin with, and so you just never know when you read something like when it's going to take shape in your work later.
Yeah, I always had like a notes app or a Google Doc or something going, or it's like just bookmark that for later.
Yeah. I just finished Dashka Slater's Accountable like earlier today. I don't know if anybody's read that one yet, but I don't know what I want to do with it yet, but I know that it has a space in my classroom in some way. I just think that it was really powerful. So that's one that I'm kind of marinating with right now.
All right, you're adding to my TBR list. These episodes always add to my TBR list.
It's
Well, this
about it's about like a social media account that was posted in 2017 and some racist things were posted about some students at the school. And so then it follows the fallout that happened, how the teens that not only it was posted about were affected, the teens that posted, the teens that followed the accounts. So I like how she's looking at it in all these angles.
Fascinating. Okay, I'm opening myself up here to add more to my TBR list, but what is something that you each have been learning about lately? So Paige, you can choose another one, or you could be like, I've said mine. But what is something either professionally or personally or in your reading life?
I've been diving into different instructional methods books of trying to figure out, okay, how do we learn and how does that affect how we teach different things? And so I've been looking at Natalie Wexler's newest book, which I can't remember the title of it, something about the science of learning, that is really fascinating about focusing on not just the science of reading, but how do we learn in general.
And we're kind of working together on that a little bit. Kourtney's looking sort of at the scientific aspect of that, and I'm looking more, I would say, at the practical application of it, and how do we invite students to reflect a little bit more about what they're learning so that it's more meaningful. And what do those invitations to reflect look like in the classroom? So we're kind of looking at that together in different ways and sharing our ideas.
One thing that I love about what you all do in this book is build in that reflection so often that I often think is missing because we are trying to just get through things, and then that critical piece of learning is just like vanished because we don't make time for it. So I do love that in your unit outlines you have those. And
It's
then
such an important part of instruction. Like being a teacher, we're just reflective individuals. And I know I would be nowhere without reflection. That is what has taught me all the lessons. But when you look at your students, I mean, reflection's a skill that needs to be built. And a lot of them don't have that yet. And they may not have an avenue to learn how to do that outside of school. And so it's interesting to us that it's not provided more explicitly in instruction.
so true. And I think people are going to want to get this book, so we will certainly link to it in the show notes and the blog post for this episode. But where else can people learn more about the two of you or connect with you online?
I am on Twitter at Timmerman Paige, or X, I guess, and through email at timmermanp@salemhigh.com.
I am on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at What the Hake.
Amazing. Paige and Kourtney, thank you both so much. This has been a wonderful conversation, and thank you for a brilliant book.
Thank you so much for having us.
If you like this episode, I bet you'll be just as jazzed as I am about my coaching program for increasing student-led discussions in your school. Shane Safir and Jamila Dugan talk about a pedagogy of student voice in their book, Street Data. They say students should be talking for 75% of class time. Do students in your school talk for 75% of each class period? I would love for you to walk into any classroom in your community and see this in action. If you're smiling to yourself as you listen right now, grab 20 minutes on my calendar to brainstorm how I can help you make this big dream a reality. I'll help you build a comprehensive plan from full-day trainings and discussion protocols like Circle and Socratic Seminar to follow-up classroom visits where I can plan, witness, and debrief discussion-based lessons with your teachers. Sign up for a nerdy, no-strings-attached brainstorm call at lindsaybethlyons.com/contact. Until next time, leaders, think big, act brave, and be your best self.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.